it's a pleasure to talk with you. I've been a fan, an ardent fan for a long time. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh, thank you. So now I connect you with Corey because I know you spent some time connected with him somehow as a teacher. Did you attend classes? You went to Capital, right?
I did go to Capitol, yeah. Well, Corey, he came to Capitol years ago, and he actually needed a guitar because he needed an extra one. So he borrowed my Eastman, and then we did a couple lessons, and we just kind of stayed in touch ever since. That's been like 8 years now.
Uh-huh.
And I see him at the Gen conference every year too.
Yeah, so do I. But I mean, we're old friends. When he was with Mel Bay, we saw each other at, I guess it was IAJE in those years, and he wound up hooking us up for a publishing deal for the USC Thornton materials that we all did. So,
oh wow,
he was like, and I would bring him in every year as a clinician, and I've been to his house and stayed there and went and did clinics for him out in Utah, and
yeah,
we go back.
That's awesome. That's
amazing cat.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic. I had him on the podcast a few months back, and it was just obviously a fantastic conversation. And he's just the best. Yeah. Such a positive and emphatic guy.
Now, Capital was Lou Fisher there?
Yeah, he just retired last year.
Yeah, I know. He's an old friend of mine too. I mean, he and Shelley Berg and all these other people that I've played and recorded with, and have since Shelley lived in Los Angeles. Lou never did, but we did a record together with a singer called Sonny Wilkinson, I guess.
Oh wow, yeah, she came to Capitol my freshman year too. Yeah.
She's an old buddy of mine. We had a duo for 6 or 7 years, and then she met Ron, her husband, who lived in Michigan, and so she just up and moved to Michigan and wrecked the duo.
How dare her?
I've never forgiven her. But she's a really good singer and a good musician, and she's such a sweetie. I mean, she's like my sister.
Wow. I mean, it's the more I'm in this world, I'm coming up on a decade of playing jazz, but like it's just incredible the amount, like how small the jazz world is, and I meet someone and like, oh yeah, I know Lou, or I know the people that I studied with, or just people I meet and play with. It's just the connections are they're amazing.
Yeah.
Especially in the education world too.
It's a pretty small world, all things considered. I mean, but the thing for me, the whole IAJE and JEN thing has been, that's kind of, Sonny was the one that introduced me to that whole thing of IAJE. I was never a part of any of that.
Yeah.
And I want to say it was the early 90s, maybe, I can't remember the year, and we had the duo. And so she pitched the duo for one of the conferences, and it happened to be in San Antonio. And so we went and we played as a duo in this rather large ballroom, and she was very well known in the vocal jazz community, so it was just me and her, and we had this like amazing response, but never got one gig out of it. Not one clinic, not one gig or whatever, but a bunch of people would come up to us. I'd be eating in a restaurant over near the Alamo, and somebody go, "Oh, are you the guy that played with?" It's like,
wow.
So we had this massive reaction. And for years after that, people would come up to me and just gush about how much they loved the duo.
Really?
So, we did it a few times there, but it never turned into much in the way of anything other than just visibility and whatever. But I'd go anywhere to hang with her. She's
yeah,
she's a scream. Really good musician too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of brings me to one of my questions overall, is just jazz education in general. I'm very curious about your first experiences at Berkeley back in the early 70s. It was clearly a place that was, especially back in the early 70s, a really fertile ground. My teacher, Stan Smith, was there around the same time. And I'm very interested in how jazz pedagogy, like how it was back then versus what it is now. Because I'm in this modern world where everything's kind of codified. I'm very curious what you were learning back then.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Bill had just written Book 1 and finished Book 2, I think in the first year I was there. And then probably had finished Book 3 by the time I was done. And I knew him, but I never studied with him. Okay. He was the chair of the guitar program. So that's kind of where it was at, as far as if you were there, you were going through the Levitt books.
Yep.
And he had the melodic rhythms for guitar thing, and he had the pick style studies for classical guitar. So in the recital class, there you go. So, and I played that Bach Bourrée as one of my recitals in my junior year.
Okay.
On a Fender Jazzmaster through a small amp, and it sucked. It was pathetic, and because I didn't know anything about that. So I was studying with Mick Goodrick, and so I went to my lesson the week after, and he goes, how'd the thing go with the recital? And I said, well, first of all, I drew a blank in the middle of the piece, so I had that moment where you just go,
How do I play guitar?
can't think of where the hell it goes next. And I was frozen. And it seemed like for like minutes, but it probably was only seconds. And then I looked at the audience, which was basically my classmates, like 30-something people or something. And they were all kind of horrified too, and just waiting for me to start crying or like throw the guitar down or something. And then I just somehow figured out where I was, and I played the rest of it.
Yeah.
So, but the experience was, it didn't scare me about playing solo guitar, but it was just something I had never tried to do. So when I went to my lesson, Nick asked me how it went. I told him what happened. He goes, oh, we laughed. And he said, well, I said, what did you play? I said, this. It was the only guitar I had. He said, well, why? You don't have a nylon string guitar? And I said, no. And he says, okay. So we finished the lesson. Then following week, I come in, and there's a guitar case on the floor, and he goes, open that. And it's like some not very expensive nylon string guitar. And he said, why don't you just, this is my nylon string guitar. He said, just keep it till the end of the semester. He said, do the other two recitals on this, which I thought was lovely. And so he found for me a couple of like Renaissance lute pieces with the sixth string down to D, and I learned them, and I just fell in love with classical guitar.
Wow.
So that for me was like, because I wasn't so horrendously trying to be the world's best jazz soloist or player or whatever at that point anyway. I mean, I was more interested in, quite frankly, Jimi Hendrix and rock and you know, Eric Clapton. And you know, I was going to see rock bands in Boston. Like I saw Jeff Beck on the Truth Tour. I saw, you know, I like all these incredible things at the time. I saw Led Zeppelin on the tour for the first album in a joint called the Boston Tea Party that probably was like 400 or 500 people.
Wow.
So that's what I was chasing and doing and listening to. And then, you know, you go to school and they'd mention Kenny Burrell and, you know, all these other people. And it's like, oh, yeah, great, you know. But it wasn't really the thing that I was really chasing hard. And that was bad enough. And then now here comes the classical guitar. And I just go out the door on the left-hand side. So for the rest of that year and for my entire senior year, basically what I worked on was classical guitar pieces.
Really?
And then they hooked me up with Andrew Caponegro, who was a concertizing classical guitarist who lived in Cambridge. And so I studied with him during the summers, and for the first year I got out of school in 72, and that's what I was trying to do, was be a classical guitar player. And then it became painfully obvious that I was never going to make any kind of a living doing that.
Right.
You know, unless I somehow, you know, practiced 30 hours a day and turned into the next Chris Parkening or something. And it's like, it just didn't seem like it was in the cards. And so then I started kind of paying more attention to the pick style thing and all of that. And I started teaching in a couple of different iterations of the Rhode Island School of Music, which is where I was from. And Hal Crook, I don't know if you know the trombone player, Hal Crook.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who was the arranging head at Berkeley until he retired a couple of years ago.
Oh, wow.
He's an old friend of mine. He graduated Berkeley a year before I did. So he hired me. I was the guitar teacher and did ear training and ensembles and stuff like that, and played gigs in a blues band and a show bands and, you know, whatever stuff I could do. And that was kind of how that all sort of started. And then finally, after I had done some of that for a number of years, in the mid-'70s, I got really serious about playing jazz. And then, you know, we'd put together a band, and there were a couple of jazz clubs in town, and I hung out at them all the time. I lived in one. Started playing Sunday nights with one band, started being the guest soloist with the house trio and leading my own groups and all that stuff. And it just turned into, you know, I kind of got heavily involved in the jazz scene there, which is, it's not huge, but they were great players. I mean, some of those people were, I don't know if you know the name Dick Johnson, but he was an alto saxophone player and clarinetist that Artie Shaw actually handpicked to be the clarinet guy doing the Artie Shaw parts in the Ghost band that he had in the 80s.
Wow.
So Dick was like, he was this monster musician and just the best guy, the greatest cat on earth, just such a great hang. His son Gary's a drummer. He's still a dear friend of mine. So it was all these people that, you know, I loved and I grew up with. And then starting in about 1979, I was in a great band led by a guy who was like just one of those self-taught guys that can play piano like McCoy and saxophone like Coltrane and clarinet like, you know, and just he had a great band. It was really fun, and I did it for like almost 3 years. And then it just came that time in my development where I just looked around at the guys who were 10 years older than me and thought, all right, well, this is probably me in 10, 15 years here. And I that could have been okay, but I had the nagging suspicion that I should try to go to New York or, and I had played a little bit in New York, but not, and it's just, really, I hate cold weather, you know. And so I said, well, maybe Los Angeles, but I wasn't doing anything about either. And then I met my wife, and she lived in Orange County.
Wow.
But she was from Massachusetts, so she came home on her first time home in 1979, I guess. And she came in my club, the place that I lived in. And a mutual friend introduced us, and, hey, how are you? Oh, wow, and Sparks and whatever. Where do you live? She said, Orange County. I went, really? So, we hung out for the rest of the time she was there, started a relationship. We were pen pals for almost a year. I went to visit her a few months later in the middle of winter in January, and it was 75 degrees, people at the beach, and I thought, here's where I'm going. So I moved a year later, and I've been here for, 41 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
So it's been great. It was I don't think I could have done much of what I've wound up having the opportunity to do here if I had remained in Providence.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, one of the things I see so often in mentors and people that I admire is that they have those opportunities like you did, where you were able to play 6-7 nights a week, literally live in clubs. What were those experiences like as like learning on the bandstand? Who are some of those important mentors where you kind of got your butt kicked?
All those guys in Providence that were, because again, in the beginning it was like a blues band. Okay, so basically we were drinking a lot of beer and playing 12-bar forms and chasing women. And that's what that was, that time of my life. But, so then the show bands were okay. So we're reading music and we're playing written arrangements of still current top 40 tunes and all of that stuff. So then when I got kind of at the end of that rope, then the next frontier was, I don't know what you call them, but just casual engagements, weddings, bar mitzvahs, 25th anniversary parties, funerals, anything where they need music, right? And this is gone now, but that was a great training ground for me and for many people my age, because, you go on a wedding and for the first set, you're going to play what we called cocktail music, which was standards. So somebody would call Days of Wine and Roses. Somebody would call a bossa nova. Somebody would call whatever. And the older guys on the gig would sweat you if you either didn't know the tune or you screwed it up. And so you became really aware of, oh man, I better know these Showbeam tunes, and this and that, and I better know how to, hey, play me an introduction. It's what, me? So it was just all of those things where you were asked to do something and you didn't know how to do it, and if you were stupid enough not to know how to do it the next time around, if you got a next time around with that contractor, then you were screwed. You weren't going to get any more work. But it was a great training ground, and I won't say I love the gigs, but I learned a lot on those gigs. And then you reach the point doing that where it's like the learning is over now. Now it's old hat and it's hackneyed, and in some cases you wind up with great players, in some cases you wind up with awful players. And, then now you start getting this bad attitude about playing the music. And it's like, you're not really playing jazz anyway. It's like you might be able to play half a chorus and blow your brains out, and nobody wants to hear that at a wedding anyway. It's like, come on, play a bossa nova and just play it nice and get the hell off here.
Right.
And then start playing for dancing, and we're going to drink and just do whatever we want. Play current top 40. So I lament the fact that that's missing now for people who are trying to play standards, and it's harder and harder for people who are kids in music school to find opportunities to play the music that they are interested in knowing more about, like the Great American Songbook and standards and the jazz classics and all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's certainly something. I mean, I'm part of that, young generation, and I've been very grateful in Columbus to work my butt off and play with older cats. But I really, really have to work for it. It's not like anyone's, and even just, there's not clubs. There's not enough clubs to play 6-7 nights a week. If I'm playing jazz, it's maybe a couple times a week or less than that. What do you tell your students nowadays? You know, they're about to graduate from their undergrad. What do you tell them is the answer to make a viable career right now? You have to wear so many hats just to make
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much just be a great player now. It's like, most of them know, first of all, that they're going to wind up teaching. So, you want to know something about doing that because, and I'll say this, you, my friend, are a good teacher, and your materials are really well prepared, and I learn a lot from your stuff. So the idea that, the old adage is if you want to really figure out whether or not you know something, well, try to teach it to somebody else, right? So that, for me, was the hook. That was what made me think, because teaching, I mean, my major at Berkeley was music education.
Oh, okay.
But it was a fallback plan. So it was like, all right, I really want to play, but in case I get in trouble and I need to take a job teaching in the junior high school, I'll have this credential. And I did my practicum teaching in a junior high school. And by the second week, I was like, there is no freaking way I'm going to do this for a living. It's like these kids are trying to run the same scams on me that I just got done doing when I was in junior high school 7 years ago. And it's like, no, I'm not going to become the other guy now.
Right.
So I just, not that I hated it, and the guy I was with was a great guy, and I loved him, and he did his best to kind of impart the whole what this means to the kids and all that stuff on me, but it just didn't call to me. And so It was a fallback plan for me. So when I first moved to the West Coast, I came here to play, and I'd go sit in somewhere, and somebody would go, I mean, the first job that was offered to me was Long Beach City College. I sat in a club, and the guy, who's still a dear friend of mine that I just talked to yesterday, who produced my first 4 records and accounted for a lot of work for me, said, hey, do you want to come teach for us over at Long Beach City College? I said, no, thank you, but I came here to play. That's what I'm here to do. And he said, well, we're doing a concert tonight, or this weekend. Here's some tickets, come. And I went, I watched the concert, and it was like, their big band with Patrice Rushen as the guest, and they did all her music, and it was, and I thought, this is a cool scene.
Yeah.
So I took that job, and it turned into like eventually a whole adjunct 9-hour-a-week thing that I did for 15 years. It was just enough that it was worth my while to pay my rent and stuff. But it took up 2 days a week for me, and I wound up playing with Dizzy Gillespie, and I brought Joe Pass in to do a concert there, and it just was a great kind of way to sort of maximize the playing thing as well as and then eventually George got a record deal. And I did his record on spec, and then he spun me off a solo deal. I did 4 solo albums for that company and something like 25 other albums as a sideman for him.
Wow.
In addition to a million other, like, just late night music, whatever, idiot, weirdo music session that starts at 3 a.m. where we're all half asleep trying to play these stupid pop tunes. I don't mean stupid pop tunes, but it's just something we didn't care anywhere near as much about as, standards or, whatever tunes we were writing and all that stuff. But
from that one connection, that was the first thing you got when you got to LA.
Well, I, by accident, met Sherman Ferguson. Do you know who Sherman was?
I don't.
He's the drummer on a lot of the Pat Martino stuff on Muse.
Okay.
So he's from Philly. And so I went to sit in. I actually went, there was a club called Carmelo's, and there was a guy that played there a lot, Frank Strazzeri. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he's a pianist, lived in Los Angeles, seemed very well connected, did sessions and, film dates and all that stuff. But he also, and he wrote, but he also had a trio that played a lot at Carmelo's. So I said, all right, well, they don't know me, but I said, if I could be the guest soloist with that guy's trio, well, then he knows Chuck, the guy that owns the place, and I could get a gig here at this one of the better jazz clubs. There was Dante's and Carmelo's, were the 2 happening places where all the musicians hung out, jazz joints. And so I hit on him. He said, I don't know you. He said, I'm not going to agree to have. He said, for all I know, you can't play. But he was nice enough to, he said, I have a Sunday gig down in Balboa, which is in Orange County. He said, come down and sit in. It starts at like 2 o'clock. So I was there that Sunday with my polytone amp, my guitar, and it's like, hey, Frank, I'm here. Oh, great. Yeah, come on, play. So he's got like a trio, right? Bass and drums. And so I don't know who they are. And I get up and I play a few tunes, and he goes, man, it gives me this really nice introduction, and he goes, on bass, Frank De La Rosa. It's like, Frank De La Rosa, I know. And then he goes, on drums, Sherman Ferguson, and I turned around, I looked at him, and I said, the Pat Martino guy? And And he laughed and he said, "Well, the guitar players say that."
Right, right,
Because
right.
everybody knew him from those sides, from those Pat Martino vinyl sides. So, so we became instant friends. And he was the guy that I said, he said, "What are you doing? Are you new in town?" I said, "Yeah." I'm looking for places to sit in. So he sent me to this joint in Long Beach called the Jazz Safari, and that was where Al Williams, the drummer, was the owner of the club and the leader of the house band. And George Shaw is the guy that was the trumpet player that heard me play and offered me the gig and gave me the tickets to the concert and eventually hired me, became my boss at City College that I worked for 15 years, my producer and dear friend, and I still talk to him every week or two.
Wow. That is
So it
incredible.
just, yeah, and I know a lot of people. George has this incredible story of how he got that whole thing rolling that takes about 4 hours to tell, but it's like another one of those things where you just go, wow, from that one little connection, it's like, boom.
Yeah, exactly. So when you were first teaching at what was the college again?
Long Beach City College.
Long Beach City College. Had you done private lessons before that, or was it all kind of
Oh
new?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I had done the Rhode Island School of Music things, and I did a
All
little
right.
private teaching on my own. But Hal had the school there that was kind of the structure, and they'd give you so many students a week in an ear training class or an ensemble or whatever you had. And there were a lot of the really good jazz players around Rhode Island also worked there, so I got to know all those people, and it just sort of expanded my whole circle of friends. But in California, it was like I just didn't know that many people, so it just kind of turned into this like fortuitous kind of meeting with Sherman that
Yeah.
he sent me to George, and turned into like a great connection. And but like I said, there's a lot of people that have those kind of situations where it's just they knock around for a while, and then all of a sudden you meet just one person that all of a sudden sort of changes your life. And George Shaw certainly did that for me.
Wow, that is awesome. Well, so how did you make your way to USC?
That again was a complete, you know, for the first 10 years I was at City College, I was like, this is good. This is all I need. I
Yeah.
don't need a full time job, whatever. But after 10 years, I'm seeing the people around me that got hired as full time, with a contract and benefits and all that stuff. I have no benefits. I have no insurance. I have nothing. I have money, the
Yeah.
salary. So, and that was cool in the beginning, but after 10 years, I started making it known. I'm really interested in some kind of full time position. Is there any chance of that? And so there was talk about we'll create a full time position and you will have to apply for it, but you'd probably be the front runner because we know you and you're doing a great
Right.
job and all this stuff. And I'm not saying anybody was lying to me, but for one reason or another, the the thing never got funded and it never happened, and it got to the point where I got an attitude about it a little bit, and I just thought, okay, let me look around a little bit. So that just put me in the frame of mind of, and this is in like 90, late 94, early 95. It put me in the frame of mind of, let me just see what jobs are around and whether or not I have a snowball's chance in hell of getting one of those jobs. So it was kind of it was an experiment. So I'm just looking around. And so a friend of mine who's a pianist who at the time was on the road with Lou Rawls came over to dinner, and he mentioned, he said, hey, did you see because he was looking around too. He said he was looking to get off the road. And so he said, hey, did you see the guitar job that USC posted? And I said, no. He said, man, it sounds just like you. So this is on a Sunday evening. So Monday, I knew Richard Smith, and he was the chair of the program at the time. And so I called him. And he said, oh, man, Frank, we have a week left on this search. And he says, I said, well, yeah, I'm planning on sending in, an application. And he said, oh, great. He said, he says, I'm the chair of the search committee. Do you need an extension on the time? And in my infinite wisdom, I said, oh, no, I'm good.
Oh, no.
And then I hang up the phone and I think, I don't have a resume. It's just like,
Right.
I'm totally unprepared for this. So I raced around for that whole week and went to a woman that actually typed a resume. Or was it? No, it was on a computer, but it was like she actually kind of did the whole input for the resume, and I brought her a whole bunch of stuff, and I sat with her for like 2 days and whatever, and I had to have like, all right, so recordings I had, but all the rest of the materials I put together and I delivered them in person on the last day just before they closed the school. And so that started the whole process. And I figured, all right, well, I don't know how many packages they had gotten. but they had this whole search committee. And so, not that long afterwards, I was notified that I was one of 3 finalists,
Wow.
which amazed me. And I thought, this is an experiment. It's kind of a workshop. It's kind of I wonder what would happen if this. So it's not that I wasn't serious about it, but I just really didn't expect to have this level of success as far as being a finalist. So, but the finalists, the other 2 were Pat Kelly, who already worked there. He was adjunct. And so he's certainly in the catbird seat as far as, all right, well, they know him, they like him. It's like he's a proven entity, a known entity. And then the other guy was a guy who had done his undergrad and his master's degree there in the classical guitar department, right? So again, certainly ahead of me in line as far as, all right, he's a known entity. And one of the guys on the committee who was at the time the chair of the classical guitar department was way into him, and I knew that. So I thought, all right, well, I'm the dark horse here, but it's only an experiment anyway, and I'm going to learn something from all of this, and then I'll be much better prepared on the next search or the next thing that I apply for, right? And so I go, and so now you have to do all this hoop jumping of like, you go and you conduct an ensemble for a whole rehearsal, and so they had Super X at the time, which is a 4-guitar kind of fusion ensemble with a rhythm section. So I go and I do that for a couple of hours, and they're all sitting in the back of the room watching me do this, the whole committee, and then I had to teach a master class, which I did, and then I had to give a concert.
Wow.
So I did that with an organ trio, and then I had to be interviewed by the committee, and then I had to be interviewed by the dean of the School of Music. All right. And at the end of all of that, they called me and said, you have the job. And I was stunned. I just thought, oh man, I can't believe this. So it worked out way better than I would have thought in my wildest dreams. And it's like, it's a great job. I mean, it's a great school. I mean, the level of talent of the faculty there is just like, you just look around at the people that you're walking around there with, and you just go, my goodness.
So what was your position when you got hired? What were your duties?
I had private students, and they give you like a load of 18 contact hours. So you have so many private students, you have so many classes, you have so many ensembles. So at the time, I was teaching a jazz guitar arranging an improv class, and jazz guitar pedagogy, studio guitar pedagogy class, and a thing called trio class, which is kind of an interesting concoction. I'm not sure if Duke Miller thought of it or who came up with the idea, but basically the program put a high premium on playing without harmonic accompaniment, without piano, without keyboard of any kind, without organ or another guitarist or whatever, just bass, drums, right? Which I thought, this is brilliant. This is really like, upping the ante as far as, okay, if you're going to play guitar at a high level, it's like, okay, so you be the hope and the dream as far as the harmony and the melody, and let's see what happens. So, and I loved that. And I had 2 full sections of that at the time, because the only 2 ensembles in the whole program were that Super X ensemble, which was 4 guitars, kind of Mike Stern, that kind of stuff, Scott Henderson, more fusion kind of stuff. And so, those were the 2 ensemble opportunities that were there when I started there. So I did the trio class, and private students. And that's kind of the way it went for a long time. And then, the program has evolved and changed, and it used to be a department. Now it's not a department, it's a program. So, there's all this kind of maneuvering in the school, because every time they add any kind of a new program, they can't just keep adding people to the school. Somebody has to take a hit in terms of reduction in the numbers of people that you are allowed to enter in your program. So when I first got there, the program was larger than it is, and it was a department. And then during the end of the time that I was chair, the school was basically moving towards having music production degree and all these other things. And, they keep adding all these things. And eventually the deans basically kind of make this little seismic shift where, okay, well, the guitar program is bigger than we need it to be. So, let's cut them down by 5 or whatever it's going to be, and, all that stuff. So that was a little bit of a kind of a chess game, tug of war, or whatever political,
Sure.
thing. And I
Red
could have
tape.
been a dragon, died on that hill, and said, "I'm not going to do this. We're not going to." Whatever. It's like change is reality. All those cliches. So
Right.
we didn't lose anybody in the end, and Pat retired anyway. So it all worked out where that kind of absorbed some of the hit that we took because he was ready to leave anyway. So, but it's just, when you're anywhere for 25 years, things change, where
Yeah.
all the dead bodies are buried. It's like, it's like working anywhere for
Right.
that
Right.
long. It's like you just kind of, you get to see a fair amount of carnage and change and all of that stuff. And you just have to kind of deal with it.
Well, that was one of my questions in general. I mean, you've seen in real time how the music has changed, how technology has changed, how academia has changed. What are some of the most positive things that you see right now with how education in jazz is working?
Well, again, that whole idea of you can't just be a good player. You have to know something about teaching and education. You have to know something about technology. You have to know something about recording and all of that stuff. And that really got brought to the forefront with this pandemic, because a lot of what we focused on was coming up with accompaniment tracks and playing on recordings and doing collaborative recordings, with a DAW and sending parts back and forth and sending files back and forth and putting your part on and all of that stuff. And it's like, so, everybody not everybody, most people knew something about it. Some people had to start from square one. But I know that it turned into a really good making lemonade out of lemons experience for our students and for our faculty.
Yeah.
Because the whole notion of just all of a sudden turning on a dime and starting everything we did online in March was brain damage. I mean, it was like we all went, we're going to what?
Yeah. Right.
And I have to say, it works beyond any of our wildest imaginations. It just worked well. I mean, for everything that we had to give up in terms of, okay, there's the latency issue, you can't play together. Okay,
Right.
fine. We came up, the music world, because everybody's been really great about sharing their ideas and their discoveries and their, hey, if you haven't tried this, check this out, or this piece of software, or this whatever technique. And so it's been great in that way. And again, I think the students that chose, and there weren't that many of them, but some students just chose to, okay, I'm out. I'll be back when it's normal. I think that was a bad decision on their part.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we expressed that to them. It's like, this is adversity, and this is a chance to learn something from this experience, as opposed to just like, okay, fold to it and come back when it gets back to what you thought it was going to be. And I'll tell you this, I think there are some things that aren't going to go back to the way they were as a result of we found out some stuff works really well online.
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah. So, it's been positive, but, if everybody's reacting, and especially, people my age, like your first inclination is to just, bitch and moan about like, oh, it ain't this. And it's like, no, come on. Let's figure this out. Let's do something here. Let's figure out how we're going to get through this. And it's been really inspiring. And the students have been great. The ones that stuck. I got a really nice note from one of my kids in my class last semester about how meaningful and substantive it was, even though we couldn't be in the same room and all that stuff. It was one of those thank you for making my day kind of email messages that you just thought, well, okay, yeah, this worked well.
Well, this is really, I mean, the time for an educator to double down on just knowing how important what we do is, and this music was created out of adversity, so there's no reason why you should ever back down because of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole thing about the question you asked earlier about students, and it's like, all right, so students your age and younger don't have the climate and the opportunities that we had as young players to be around older experienced players and get paid for kind of learning on the job and get our butt kicked by somebody who's going to go, that's not how you play an introduction for a tune like this, and all those things. It's like you learn by it's the school of hard knocks. So what we lament about the loss of that is made up for in other ways, right? I mean, there's Band in a Box, there's iReal Pro, there's all kinds of play-along tracks that, I don't know if you've heard iReal Pro with the real tracks and real drums. It's like, Band in a Box. It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
amazing. It's really good sounding. It's not as good as a live band, but it's pretty freaking close.
yeah.
And so, what that can provide for you instead, not to mention all of the video content, like, I mean, I have stuff on my music masterclass that I've done and True
Right.
Fire and the stuff that, and you can tell some of these students, they just sit there in a room and watch the thing over 3 million times until they know every single thing you did with every finger on your hand.
Right.
And when I was trying to learn from transcribing, I was transcribing from vinyl, driving the people around me absolutely nuts. So, there are a lot of advantages that younger players have with regard to all that, not to mention YouTube. I mean, just that alone.
Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
toolkit in YouTube where you can slow stuff down and manipulate the
Sure.
time and all that stuff is like, I would have killed for that, when I was a young person, if I had a notion that was coming along in 30 or 40 years.
Right, right, right. I mean, the proliferation of information is just insane because you hear so many people that had mentors or on the band experience or even just would hang out with someone like there was kind of a lot of mystery I've heard from people that were growing up in that age because it wasn't like, oh, you should play this scale and do this specific thing. It was more like, no, you're doing it wrong. Go figure it out by transcribing a vinyl. But now it's like it's very direct. It's like very specific information. Like this is how you approach every little thing ever.
Yeah, and there's so much in the way of materials that are just, I mean, I could live 10 lifetimes and never run out of just piano books that I want to go through and like David Berkman's Jazz Harmony book or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I use that in my class now. It's like it's just got such a different viewpoint of how to go at messing with the harmony
Sure.
compared to a lot of guitar books. It's not that it's like completely different information. It's just a different sensibility in terms of how he presents it. And one of my graduate students sent it to me as a gift, a number of years ago, and said, "Frank, this
Yeah.
reminds me of all the stuff that we talked about in your class, but it's a piano player perspective and whatever." And it's like, so at first glance, I look at it and I go, I like this imagery of like concentric circles. So the starting point is this, and then, there's like, sub 2/5 and all that stuff, and it just kind of goes further out like that, and the imagery is really, really engaging. And then the piano voicings are, at first glance you go, oh, I can't play that, and you go, oh yes I can. Right, and so you discover a whole bunch of different harmonic treatments that you just thought, wow,
Yeah.
this is definitely getting me into some of the richer sounding voicings here that I was on the verge of discovering, but for some reason I just kind of wasn't finding it until I just started checking this piano guy out. So, there are a bunch of, again, materials and new ones come out every day, either books or video content or
Sure.
something that, I mean, I'm looking at a cabinet here that's like a CD cabinet that holds probably, I don't know, 700 or 800 CDs. And, you've heard the adage, everything you need to know about playing this music is right there in your living room, in your
Sure.
collection of recordings.
Yeah.
But, the notion that you're going to go out and dig that out yourself
Right.
is no small task. Whereas now, I mean, compared to even when I was at Berkeley, so there were X amount of materials, and the people that were really well known in jazz education as far as like materials were David Baker, Jerry Coker, Jamie Aebersold, all that stuff, right? So that was kind of the gold standard for a long time. But now, I mean, it's like with IAJE and JEN and all of that stuff, and you've been to those conferences where you see Jamie Aebersold standing there in the middle of his booth with all those materials, and you just
Right.
go, man,
Well, one of my questions is, as many great materials there are, I find that a lot of it is it's like content that could be easily inputted, but it's maybe not getting to the heart of like language or like being expressive. But like, how do you deal with those other elements of just playing music on a personal, like human level, as opposed to here's your Dorian scale, here's your altered scale, blah blah blah.
yeah. I mean, we all wrestle with that as teachers. It's like, it's hard to, it's hard to teach somebody to feel good.
Right.
I mean, it's like going into a party and there's somebody there that's looking really bored and like they're not having a good time and just saying enjoy yourself and just like you could just turn that on,
Right.
kind of thing. So that's to me is the real hard nut to crack as far as teaching is to really inspire somebody to kind of let go and let the music happen and really feel good about it and play it with love and respect and do something that is engaging and moving and feels good. You know, I mean, we have a lot of students that are great players, but then again, we have some students that are capable players and they have a lot of information, but they just don't have enough experience using it to sound like it's something that they're really, it's like listening to somebody speak broken English or something. It's like,
Right.
you know, that whole language analogy of like, you get the right information, but, you know, the inflection is whack.
Yeah, the words in the wrong order, something.
Yeah, and every student's a little different that way, and I don't, again, as a teacher, the first thing I discovered in the first week I taught was, do not represent yourself as the person who knows everything, because you'll be proven wrong in the first hour. It's like, you know, I can't tell you how many times students ask me stuff and I go, let me get back to you.
Right.
You know, I need time to think about that. I just don't have a ready stock answer for that.
Well, that humility already puts you on a better level as an educator, because there's a lot of people that just BS it.
Yeah, and you gotta have, well, you eventually have a plan A and a plan B and maybe a plan C. And eventually you're going to run into that student that's going to require a plan D that you haven't come up with yet. But
Right.
that's the reward of teaching to me. It's like, I don't represent myself as, okay, so I know everything and I've seen it all and like, ask me anything. It's like, no, I'm doing my best to diagnose, all right, where is this student at and how can I give this person something else that's going to move them forward and excite them and you know, some information that they can work with. And it's like, you know, the more I can share with them of anything that I really get a lot of mileage out of and really use to good effect, and then see what they do with it. Well, you know, again, that sort of in turn washes back on me, because now, I can't tell you, I'm sure you've had the experience where you tell somebody about whatever it is, you know, altered dominant or melodic minor or whatever, and they come back in and they play stuff and you go, hey, that's show me that.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, Mick Goodrick used the expression, it was this very Zen kind of parable about information is not like something physical, like a hamburger. Like if I have a hamburger and I give you half of it, I don't have that anymore. I got half a hamburger. But if I have information and I share it with you, well, now I can see what you do with it and I can benefit from your concept of what to do with that information. Why would you not want to participate in that process?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, how do you deal with you know, you even mentioned back when you were in school that you were listening to Led Zeppelin and Jeff Beck, and they were telling you about Kenny Burrell, and that's cool. But now, all these years later, we're even farther removed from the roots and foundation of jazz, which is bebop, you know, all that stuff that you need to be accountable for as, you know, a jazz guitarist. But it gets more and more difficult to get people excited unless they're really, really into it already. I mean, how do you reconcile, like, there's the modern world, but you also need to know all of this?
Yeah, you can't make somebody like someone. I mean, I proved that at Berkeley. It was like, you know, listen to, if you play like Joe Pass, it's like, who? You know? And so you have to experience it, and it has to suck you in, and you can't, I mean, again, there are, like, my students listen to Julian Lage, or, you know, younger students, younger players that are recording now and that are, you know, that are hot and that have a lot of visibility. But it doesn't mean that they're averse to knowing who Grant Green is, or who somebody that I think would be a really interesting person for them to discover. And it doesn't always work, but, you know, the more, because we do a section of that in my class where it's like, okay, so you know all the people you know and like, and you know all the people, you know, that are active now and that you go to see when they come into town. But, you know, here are a few other players like Jimmy Rainey, or somebody like Ed Bickert, or somebody that, you know, you haven't spent any time with, that are wonderful players, and that there's a lot to learn from. And it's a little bit like, you know, three guys are going to go, oh man, Ed Bickert, there's a guy. How did I miss him? How did I not know about him? And then the other person would be, well, you know, I'm much more into Pat Martino, or I'm much more into whoever. So, you know, I look at myself as the facilitator in terms of, all right, here are a bunch of things that I know about. And again, by the same token, a lot of the people that they mention, I go, you know, I don't know that much about that person. And I go check them out and I think, wow, this person's a good player, and it's like I'm gonna check out some of their stuff and maybe steal a few ideas and whatever.
Yeah, I love that approach because you have to meet the student at their level. You can't just, like you said, you can't just tell them, this is what I like, this is what I do, here's all the things that I do it, the concrete way. You have to meet them where they're at, have that humility.
I kind of have the good fortune now that it's I've been doing what I do long enough that enough students coming in know what I do. So if somebody comes in and says, I want to play like Eddie Van Halen, I go, you're in the wrong room.
Right.
I mean, I know something about that, and I actually posted a couple of things on Facebook of me sessions that I did for George Shaw in the 80s where I'm playing like a thing that sounds like a little bit of like the tapping thing and whatever.
Oh, wow.
And I got a screaming sound, and most people are not necessarily horrified, but they're amazed at, that's you.
Right.
I can't imagine you doing that. And I always say, hey, look, I wasn't born with a fat guitar in my lap. It's like, I played rock. I went to see all these guys. It's like,
Right.
I still like that stuff. I just don't get to do it a whole lot around anything you'd know anything about. But,
Right. Well, switching gears just a little bit, I'm very curious on what your first experience with solo guitar was. I know you mentioned maybe the classical music. Was that kind of your first experience doing solo guitar music?
Yeah, I mean, it never. Well, not never. I mean, the first year I was at Berkeley, there was a guy who was a classmate of mine as a freshman, and he could play harmonized versions of pretty much any tune you could name. And we would just hang out in like the student lounge because, for the first couple of months I was commuting from Providence on the train. So, I had a lot of downtime where I'm sitting around in the lounge waiting for whatever. And so, guys that were in our class and I was in classes with would wind up there and we'd talk about the homework assignment or ensemble stuff or whatever. So he, kind of impressed me as, wow, it's not, on the level of somebody like Joe Pass, but it's definitely something where and this was before I really knew anything about Joe anyway, but he could play harmonized versions of tunes. And so I thought, well, that's something I don't know a whole lot about, although I had studied with a guy before I ever went to Berkeley, the guy that wrote my letter of recommendation, actually. And he taught me like Misty and the Jobim tunes as chord melody things. And he had a whole system. It was all handwritten. I still have the notebooks. And but he was a pro around Providence, and he, we did some reading stuff and whatever, but he got me into that whole notion of, playing a harmonized version of it. Now, it wasn't so much with the intent of you're going to play this all alone all the time as a solo guitarist. So, the thing that really made me pay a lot of attention to solo jazz guitar was Joe, because, the first album that I got completely just bowled over by was the Virtuoso album.
Right.
And so that started that whole thing, and then that sort of began that whole fascination with the style itself and with him as a player, because I just dug him. And then I got to meet him in '74, and then I knew him for 20 years, and it's, so there was a lot of that, and I got to see him play in places where I just watch him play all by himself and hold the whole room in the palm of his hand, and I just think, that's something to do right there. It looks like scary as hell, but it's like, I would like to be able to play at that level.
Right. I've known that you had that relationship with him. That's incredible. That's really incredible. Solo guitars, it is like the scariest thing because there's so many things you're accountable for. There's so many different textures and things you have to
and so many different ways of going at it. There are many ways of approaching it. So, but I just kind of fell in love with his whole notion of doing it, and then the fact that I got to know him and hang out with him a lot really just sort of cemented that whole thing in my mind about this is something I want to be able to do. Not to mention the fact that it's like, it's easy to present. So if you're going to travel and you don't have to take a trio, or you don't have to play with a pickup rhythm section, which could be great and it could be awful.
Yeah.
And I've had all of those experiences where, I put my book in front of somebody and they go, I don't read. It's like, okay. B flat, 2.
Right.
Yeah, I don't read. So, and God bless him. I mean, I have to say that last time that happened to me, it was like the drummer that said that to me, and I just thought, okay, fine. But he was a really good drummer, and he listened well, and I stayed away from the things that were really reading intensive, and he did a fine job of just getting through it by ear, and we had a good time.
Right.
But sometimes you just get a just not very strong rhythm section, and you just have to do the best that you can. So if you go play solo, you know what you're going to get.
Yeah, exactly.
Mystery is
You can only get mad at yourself.
right. Fewer airline tickets, fewer all of that.
Sure. When you were hanging with
love-
Joe, what's that?
I just love the notion of playing, even a house concert, even just something small and intimate where, people can make requests and they can ask you questions and all of that stuff. It's like, I did that last night for the LA Jazz Society on Zoom, and it was like, it was wonderful, especially now since there's no gigs anyway. And it was like,
Yeah, solo guitar is definitely a huge. There's just a big place in my heart for it, because I was lucky to study with Stan Smith at Capitol, and he, I remember having lessons where I would walk in and he'd be sitting in a corner being all esoteric and be like, "Okay, play solo for 15 minutes." I'd be like, "No, I can't," and then I would do it, and he would tear me apart, and it was the best. And he held that in such high regard, that art, that I've fallen in love with it. It's one of my favorite things ever to do, and it's still the hardest thing that I do.
yeah. Well, and you do it well, may I add.
Oh, well, thank you. Trying. So when you were hanging with, what's that?
I just watched something online. Was it Spring can really hang you up the most or something? And the first couple of voices you played. No. Yeah. No. It was.
Yeah, I've done that tune. It's on my YouTube.
Right. Is it on your website?
I think so, probably.
On your website, it's a solo thing of a tune that I watched you play the first couple of voicings, and I went, "Oh man, nice, odd kind of voicings there." Oh, you must believe in spring.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah, that one's pretty adventurous.
Some really, really nice content there.
Oh well, thank you. I'm a little bit of a masochist with the big voicings.
Yeah,
it's fun.
That was very much against Joe Pass's philosophies. I would play something. I'd play one of those pain, suffering voicings, and he'd go, "Too hard."
Well, that was one of my questions when you were hanging with them. What was the level of interaction as far as hey, here's how you do bass lines. Hey, here's how you do this type of texture. Was it that kind of back and forth, or was it more like you would hang and play and listen and just figure it out at home?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that would be at his house, and we, whatever, I'd taken him to have his car fixed and picked him up or something, and then we go back to his house, and he goes, "Hey, you want to come in and play?" And I said, "All right." So we sit in his couch in his den and just play. And, he was perfectly fine with, I would say, "So what is this thing you do here? What is that? And how did you come up with that?" And in some cases he'd go, "Oh," and he didn't have a really theoretical explanation for a whole lot of stuff. It just, he'd go, "Oh, that's this. And I do this, and then I add this," right? And I go, "Oh, okay." And, in some cases it was this really funny, answer, he'd go, "I stole that from George Shearing."
Right.
And then in some cases we would be, because John Pisano figured heavily into this, because I had met John I made it a point to go meet John pretty early on when I moved to Los Angeles, because I knew about him. I thought, I want to know this guy. And he was playing with, do you know the name Oscar Castro Neves?
Oh, of course. I'm a huge Brazil nut.
So they had a duo gig at a place in Studio City right near John's house. So I just went there, and there were 10 people in the joint, and it was a little upstairs little room in a restaurant, and they're sitting on these wooden stools playing nylon string guitar duets. And I just introduced myself. So John would ask me to come over, and he'd say, "Yeah," I'd say, "What's going on?" And he'd go, "Oh, Joe's going to come, and whatever, and we're going to have something to eat." John's a great cook. And I'd bring stuff from, my folks would send me these little Italian care packages from Providence, with provolone cheese and whatever, pepperoni and this stuff. So I'd bring my stuff and throw in, and then Joe Pass would come, and he basically brought his cigar. and we, there'd be some other people there sometimes it was just the three of us, and we just hang around.
Wow.
Listen to music, talk about music, play guitars, argue about chords. Why do you play that? That was usually Joe. Why do you play that there?
Wow.
So there was just that. It was just guitar hang.
Wow. That's so awesome. That's, that type of environment where you're just able to hang with someone that you admire and respect is, as much as academia and school is great, because you have all these faculty members and you have classes, that ability to be in close contact with someone where it's that pressure of school or whatever is not there.
Yeah, I mean that's where it started. It was like if you wanted to know what somebody played like before recording and all that stuff, you basically went and watched them and asked them questions and bugged them. And so by the time I got here, it's like that was part of my mission. There were X amount of players and I already knew Joe because I had met him in Boston. But, Pisano, I would see in the back of Downbeat, they would always have listings of who was playing in the clubs in the big cities, right? Los Angeles and New York and Boston and whatever. And so I'd always see in Los Angeles John Pisano. And I knew had been with Tijuana Brass, but I also knew he had been with Chico Hamilton and a bunch of different jazz things, and so he was, and by that time he was like kind of heavily associated with a lot of the Brazilian people, so because he loves that music. So I made it a point to meet him early on, and it was just part of the sort of the plan before I ever got here. Was like I said, all right, I'll find this guy and find that guy, and,
Right.
I mean, in some places, like I called up like Freddie Hubbard and, said, I figured, all right, well, I want to play with Freddie Hubbard. So like, who's this? And I introduced myself. I'm new in town. I play guitar. He goes, oh yeah, great. Well, good luck.
Wow.
You know me from Adam, and so that didn't work out. I called like people like Joe Farrell. I don't know if you know his name. The saxophone player.
Yeah.
And in some cases they were nice. I'd go in clubs and just meet people. I went in a club and I was asking, I don't know if you know who Pat Senator is.
No.
Bass player. He was with the Tijuana Brass as well, but he also is a very well-known and highly regarded jazz bass player. And he ran a place at the time in Malibu that was his dream club. He owned it. It was called Pasquale. It was right on the beach in Malibu. Great little joint. And so I go there one night, and Joe Farrell is playing there, and it's like, I'm talking to Pat, and I'm hitting on him for a gig, and he's looking at me like, I don't know you. And
You would straight up ask people.
Yeah.
That's
I'd say,
awesome.
hey, I want to play here. And he'd go, oh, you do? Who are you?
Right.
So Roy McCurdy was the drummer that night. And so he overhears the conversation. So Pat basically kind of just ghosts me. Which, it's all right, fine. It's like, by that time I had a bit of a tough skin. And Roy comes over and he goes, I couldn't help overhearing what's going on. And he goes, you're new in town? And I said, well, I got here a couple of months ago, whatever. And he couldn't have been nicer to me. And he gave me some ideas about other places to go sit in. And he said, he just doesn't know you. He said, don't feel bad and, don't take it hard and whatever. And, what do you do? And he just couldn't have been more kind and concerned, where he could have just basically walked away and go, well, maybe he'll leave now.
Yeah. That's I can't imagine, like you mentioned Joe Pass, where he would just say, oh, this is this thing. Like I know players who like have no concept of scales or I play with this saxophone player in Columbus that's older, and he knows like every tune ever, but he doesn't know what key it's in. He's like, what note does it start on? Okay, got it. And he just destroys. Like that concept of learning the music that way back in the day, which is how it was because things weren't codified. It's like mind blowing to me. I wish I could.
You know the name Bill Hyde?
No.
Heid.
No.
All right. When we're done or when you have a moment, just maybe look him up. He's an old friend of mine. He's from Pittsburgh, I guess, originally. But when I met him, he was living in Detroit. And he's that same person, but organ, piano.
Wow.
He's a complete polymath. He's self-taught. He can play anything at any tempo and any key, but he doesn't really know. He knows something about what he's doing in terms of calling it what it is.
Right.
But he's just one of those sort of like savant, kind of rather bright people that figured it out and hung out with Big John Patton and Jimmy Smith and like all the really heavy organ people. And he's very highly regarded as an organist, but he's also one of the most unusual cats you'll ever meet in your life. And he's that guy of like for instance, if a minor 7-flat-5 chord to him is like, say it's on the note A, it's A Stella, which is the first chord in Stella by Starlight. A Stella. Okay? A raised 9 chord is E Rock Candy, because that's where he came across it, was in Jack McDuff's Rock Candy.
Whoa.
Like that.
That's incredible, especially on piano. That's for a horn player, it kind of makes sense because it's so linear and okay, but for a harmonic player to not name it, that's crazy. That's
when you hear
cool.
him play, I think you'll be impressed. I mean, he's a holy terror of an organist,
Wow.
and
Is
he
he in
has
LA now?
recordings, like he's used Peter Bernstein and like all these different people. Do you know Perry Hughes from
Yeah.
Detroit?
Hmm.
Perry plays on his stuff. Randy Gillespie, the drummer,
Yep. Yep.
and a bunch of high-profile people that are very well known, and they were old friends of his. I mean, Bill knows George Benson. George Benson knows Bill, I should say.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I'm gonna check him out.
George Benson, sort of, but George Benson knows Bill Hyde.
Right. Right. That's crazy.
The Pittsburgh thing.
Well, one of my last questions. Thank you for doing this, by the way.
My pleasure.
What are you working on lately? What's getting you excited about the music and as insane as the world is? What's
I'm just I'm sitting in the midst of my little sort of studio setup here, and I'm trying to be. I did last year. I did a Christmas kind of EP of just solo guitar treatments of some holiday, Christmas tunes that I like, and some of it is like I've got my love to keep me warm, not necessarily a Christmas tune,
sure,
but
sure.
songs of the season. So that was my first actual, and I didn't make a CD. I just did CD baby download only.
Got it.
But now that I have, because I'm on sabbatical this semester, so I really didn't have to go anywhere
Congrats.
for 6 months. So I'm going to spend some time with this and with Logic, and just get more comfortable with the idea of playing bass on my stuff, and using some kind of drum something, or playing this.
Bandero.
Or whatever, or using some kind of canned drum stuff, or using live drums, because all of my friends can do live drums if you send them the file.
Sure.
So that's kind of what I'm experimenting with now, is just kind of what interests me in terms of format, and in terms of whether I'll sing on stuff, or whether I'll sing the out chorus or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I have some time now to really play with the recording toys that I've spent all my hardly earned money on over the last few years.
Right.
This is my time to be able to kind of get more comfortable with using those. So I'm pretty excited about that. And, I have the whole social media thing. I have a thing on Instagram.
Yep.
I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's
OMG.
sort of a weird presence called 1 Minute Guitar, OMG.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
And, I'm just trying to find ways to be able to engage on social media and avoid all of the noise that happens there, because I'm basically there for, shameless self-promotion and
Sure.
look at me.
That's the function of it. If you're a musician in 2021 now.
Yeah, but I mean, in the end, I still like going out to play, and I'll go out to play for. Well, now we can't do it, but when the world starts back up again, I mean, I was supposed to play at Dizzy's in Lincoln Center on Memorial Day, and it took me rather a long time to get that booking, and I was really looking forward to it, and it just sort of fell out from under me. They'll eventually reschedule it, but things like that, where it's like I don't have to play every night. I don't even have to play every week, but I like to go out and play, and I still that really just I mean, it gets me excited. So I still really want to do that once we can do it again. But right now, we're all just trying to stay alive.
Yeah, seriously.
It's bad out here. It's just
I know LA is really awful.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Well, we're all just trying to be as careful as we can. Well, not we're all.
Well,
some of us are trying. Yeah.
If we all were, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Exactly. We're in a pretty bad place right at the moment. But, it can't last forever, and the vaccine's coming out, and there's hope on the horizon and all of that. So I'm just trying to keep my fingers going and keep my memory, knowing those tunes, and just keep things like I did last night, and until the real thing comes along, as the song goes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Frank, so much for doing this. So can you reiterate where people can find you?
This.
Oh,
thank you for doing this, and thank you for being the player and the concerned individual that you are.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. The music is important to me, and it's the only thing I can do well, sort of. So
I don't know
that's all I got.
But that's an understatement. The music is very important to you, obviously.
Yep. Can you just reiterate where people can find you on the internet?
Yeah, my website is just frankpotenza.com, all lowercase, no space. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. All right, my YouTube channel is Frank Potenza Videos, and And I actually just got done putting up all my OMG stuff 1 minute ago.
I saw that. I was watching a bunch. Yeah.
So, again, it's like every now and again, somebody will say to me, why don't you do this? Or have you thought about doing this? And in some cases, it's like, I don't have the time for that. And in some cases, it's like, yeah, well, now I have the time for that. I can think about doing that. So I'm probably going to spend a lot more time on Instagram in the next several months here and just kind of trying to build that whole thing. But, it's one thing at a time and one step at a time and just trying to keep it all moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, I always enjoy watching your OMG videos, so I'll be on the lookout for more. Love those.
Thanks. It's music for busy people. We have a short attention span. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm just giving you a minute of something to deal with and let you go.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Frank. Let's stay in touch.
Please, yes, let's do that. And thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. All right, take care. Have a great sabbatical.
All right, thanks.